Before she was filth, she was a goddess. Before her hands were calloused and stained, they commanded starships. Zilia Valerius, heiress to the Cygnian ascendancy and its trillion-credit fortune, could purchase moons with a whisper. Yet, to inherit her empire, she had to prove she was worthy of its soul. She shed her iridescent skin, her silken gowns, her very name, to become a nameless beggar in the galaxy's grimiest gutter. She sought a single flicker of true kindness in a universe blinded by power and greed. She tested 1,000 souls from 12 worlds, and 1,000 souls failed. Despairing, she was ready to surrender her birthright, until she met one man, a human, a simple, low-level technician named Alex Ryder, who had nothing to give but everything to offer. The air in the Valeria spire atop Chiron station didn't so much circulate as it breathed. Each particle was scrubbed, ionized, and infused with a calming pheromone derived from the blossoms of Cygnus X1's native flora. From her panoramic window, Zilia Valerius could see the entire station laid out below her like a jeweler's display. The commerce ring glittered with the lights of 1,000 species haggling and trading. The diplomatic sector was a serene, ordered jewel. Far below, shrouded in recycled steam and the station's own shadow, lay the lower vents, a place she had only ever seen on schematic diagrams, labeled simply as Engineering and Habitation, Tier 7. It was the station's engine room and its forgotten cellar. "It is an ugly place, is it not?" Zilia didn't turn. The voice, smooth as polished obsidian, belonged to her father, Imperator Cygnus Valerius. He stood behind her, his own reflection, a towering, powerful silhouette against the star-dusted void. His skin, like hers, held a faint, pearlescent shimmer, a hallmark of their ancient lineage. "It is necessary," Zilia replied, her voice a practiced melody of diplomacy. "The station requires a foundation, as does an empire," he said, his tone shifting from philosophical to pointed. "Which brings us to the matter of your ascension, the test of empathy." Zilia finally turned, her 4 eyelids, 2 primary, 2 nictitating membranes for filtering stellar radiation, blinking in slow succession. "Father, is it truly necessary? It is an archaic ritual. My acumen in quantum economics and strategic fleet command is unparalleled. My tutors, including the esteemed Professor Eldrin, confirm this. Surely that is the foundation an empire needs." Her father's gaze was unyielding. A calculator can manage economics. A machine can command a fleet. But neither can lead. The ascendancy is not a corporation, Zilia. It is a coalition of living souls. Before you command their fortunes, you must first prove you understand their worth, even the lowest. The test of empathy was a brutal, humbling tradition. The heir to the Valerius throne was to be stripped of all status, wealth, and identity. Using advanced biomedical technology, they would be disguised as the most wretched of beings and cast out into the galactic commons. They were given a single, untraceable data chip containing a nominal amount of credits, enough for a few days' sustenance. The goal was not to survive, but to find one individual, any individual, who would offer genuine, unprompted kindness without any hope of reward. If the heir failed within one standard galactic cycle, they were deemed unworthy. The throne would pass to the next in line. And the next in line was her cousin, Kalen. As if summoned by the thought, Kalen entered the chamber. He was all sharp angles and predatory grace, his smile a weapon. "Discussing the family vacation, are we? I hear the lower vents are lovely this time of year, cousin." "Very authentic." "Kalen," the Imperator acknowledged with a curt nod. "Your presence is timely. You will bear witness to the sealing of the trial's parameters." Zilia ignored her cousin's smirk. "I will not fail." "Of course you won't," Kaelin purred, circling her. "But just in case, I have already begun drafting some modernization policies. The ascendancy has grown soft, too much focus on understanding, not enough on acquiring." His words were a threat wrapped in ambition. Kaelin saw the test as a foolish sentimentality. He believed power, not empathy, was the only currency that mattered. If she failed, his reign would be one of ruthless expansion and conquest. The soul of her people was what was truly at stake. The transformation was clinical and terrifying. In the sterile white medbay, a dermal symbiote, a masterpiece of Signian biotechnology, was bonded to her skin. The creature, a mindless sheath of programmable cells, suppressed her natural iridescence, replacing it with a sallow, blotchy complexion. It mimicked the texture of scarred, weathered human skin, the most common and often most ignored species on the station. Her elegant, slender fingers were thickened, her nails cracked and grimy. A vocal modulator was implanted in her larynx, turning her melodic voice into a rough, hoarse rasp. Finally, a neuroinhibitor was fitted at the base of her skull. It wouldn't dull her thoughts, but it would prevent her from accessing any of the autonomic martial skills drilled into her since birth. She would be utterly, completely vulnerable. Her father presented her with a set of rags. "Your new raiment, my daughter." His voice was heavy with the weight of tradition. Kaelin watched from the doorway, a data slate in his hand, looking utterly bored. "Try not to get recycled for biomass, cousin. It would be a terribly common way to go." As she dressed, the last vestiges of Zilia Valerius, heiress of the ascendancy, vanished. In the mirror, a stranger stared back. A human woman, perhaps in her late 20s, with haunted, weary eyes, a gaunt face, and clothes that smelled of grime and despair. They named this persona Lena. "The trial begins now," the Imperator declared. "You have one cycle. May the stars guide your path." She was escorted not to her private grav lift, but to a service conduit. A sanitation droid, oblivious to her identity, nudged her forward into the grimy, rattling car. The descent was jarring. The perfumed air of the spire gave way to the metallic tang of ozone, then the cloying smell of recycled food protein, and finally, the damp, mildewed stench of the lower vents. The lift doors hissed open, revealing a world she had never imagined. Dim, flickering lights cast long shadows down a corridor slick with condensation. Pipes gurgled and hissed overhead. Beings of a dozen species trudged past, their faces grim, their shoulders slumped with exhaustion. No one made eye contact. No one looked at the pathetic woman who stumbled out of the service lift. She was invisible. She was nothing. Lena clutched the cold data chip in her pocket. The test had begun. The lower vents were a symphony of misery, and Lena was its newest, most discordant note. Her first hours were a blur of sensory overload. The constant, low-frequency hum of the station's primary atmospheric recyclers vibrated through the soles of her worn boots. The air was thick with the competing smells of welding fumes, nutrient paste, and unwashed bodies. Drawing on her strategic training, she decided to approach the test methodically. She wouldn't just beg, she would observe and select her targets. Her first mark was a Vithar merchant, his forearms laden with gleaming techno-trinkets as he strode from a transport tube. The Vithar were known for their rigid honor codes. Perhaps honor extended to charity. She positioned herself near his path, adopting a posture of utter defeat. "Sir," she rasped, her modulated voice cracking, "a crumb, a single credit for some food." The Vithar, a creature of polished carapace and whirring mandibles, stopped. His multifaceted eyes appraised her from head to toe. For a moment, a flicker of hope ignited in Lena's chest. He reached into a pouch, but instead of a credit chip, he produced a small silver canister and sprayed her with a foul-smelling mist. "Vermin," he chittered, the universal translator on his collar, rendering the word with cold precision. "You carry blight. Stay away from my stall." He scurried off, leaving her shivering and reeking of industrial disinfectant. The hope died, replaced by a cold, stinging shame. Her training had taught her to analyze failure and adapt. The Vithar valued purity and commerce. She was an impurity, an obstacle to commerce. She needed a different target. She spotted a Grolak docker, a massive, tusked biped known for their communal, clan-based societies. They were strong, pragmatic, and fiercely loyal to their own. Maybe that loyalty created a baseline of communal compassion. He was finishing a shift, wiping grease from his thick hide with a rag. Lena approached him more cautiously. "Excuse me. I know you've worked hard. I don't want to be a burden. But I haven't eaten today." Grolak grunted, his gaze sweeping over her. It wasn't hostile, just evaluative. He looked at her thin arms, her ragged clothes. "Can you work?" he rumbled. I can try," she said, surprised. "The loading bay needs scourers. The pay is half a portion of nutrient paste per shift. Go there." He pointed a thick, calloused thumb down a dark corridor. "Do not beg. Begging is for the useless. Work is for the living." He turned and walked away. It was not cruelty, but it was not kindness either. It was a cold, hard transaction. Her disguise was that of a weak, frail creature. A scourer's job would likely break her in this vulnerable state. The test was not to find employment, it was to find unearned compassion. Grolak had failed. Days began to blur. Lena learned the cruel economy of the vents. A discarded, half-eaten protein bar was a treasure. A dry alcove under a venting pipe was a luxury suite. The data chip her father had given her was a lifeline, but she used it sparingly, hoarding the credits. Each purchase felt like a small failure, a reminder that she was still relying on her old life's resources. The mental toll was far worse than the physical. The constant dismissal, the looks of disgust, the utter invisibility. It was like acid, slowly dissolving the core of who she was. The arrogance of the Heiress was long gone, replaced by the gnawing desperation of the Beggar. She saw a group of Zilithi scholars, their slender forms floating on personal grav discs, their minds supposedly open to the great philosophical questions of the cosmos. When she approached, they simply raised their discs a few feet higher, discussing the theoretical nature of poverty as an economic construct as they sailed over her head, completely detached from the reality at their feet. The worst encounter came on her fourth day. She was huddled in a doorway, shivering from a coolant leak dripping from the ceiling, when a security patrol passed. Two hulking figures in station uniforms. One of them, a broad-shouldered human, named Officer Miller, stopped and nudged her with his boot. "No loitering, vagrant. Move along." "I have nowhere to go," she whispered, her throat raw. "Not my problem," Miller grunted. His partner, a being whose species she didn't recognize, simply stared through her. "This is a transit corridor. You're an obstruction. Get up, or I'll put you in a detention cell to be processed." Processed. The word was sterile, but she knew what it meant. Unregistered, penniless individuals were often shipped off station to labor colonies. It would mean the end of the test. She would fail. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her misery. She struggled to her feet, her body aching with a fatigue that was more than just physical. As she stumbled away, she heard Miller laugh to his partner. "Human trash, they're the worst. breed like vermin, and end up clogging the drains of the galaxy. The casual cruelty, coming from a member of her disguised species, was the final blow. Her meticulously constructed strategy, her hope in finding a sliver of decency in some species, collapsed into dust. Despair washed over her. Maybe Kaelin was right. Maybe the universe was just a cold, brutal machine, and empathy was a delusion, a flaw in the code. She found a secluded corner in a maintenance tunnel, far from the main walkways, and sank to the floor. The cold seeped into her bones. She had been a goddess who walked among stars, and now she was just trash in a forgotten corner of the universe. She pulled her rags tighter around herself, a single hot tear tracing a clean path through the grime on her cheek. She was ready to give up. The throne, the empire, none of it was worth this profound, soul-crushing emptiness. The darkness of the maintenance tunnel was a comfort. It asked nothing of her. In the black, she wasn't Lena the Beggar or Zilia the Heiress. She was simply a point of misery, a silent scream in the void. She had pulled a discarded thermal blanket over herself, the fabric stiff with age and chemicals, and was trying to ignore the gnawing hunger in her stomach. The test was lost. Her world was lost. A sudden clatter of metal echoed down the tunnel, followed by a string of curses that were creative in their blend of galactic standard and distinctly human slang. A beam of light sliced through the darkness, dancing erratically before settling on her huddled form. Lena flinched, shielding her eyes. A figure stood silhouetted in the light. "Oh, hell." "Sorry," a man's voice said. "Didn't mean to scare you. My mag spanner slipped." He walked closer, and the beam from the light mounted on his head revealed a man in a grease-stained technician's jumpsuit. His face was sharp with a day's worth of stubble, and his brown hair was matted with sweat. He looked tired, but his eyes, when they met hers, held no disgust. Only surprise. This was Alex Ryder. "You shouldn't be back here," he said, his voice softening. "It's not safe. The conduits can vent superheated steam without warning." Lena just stared, expecting the inevitable dismissal, the boot, the command to move along. Instead, he knelt, keeping a respectful distance. He wasn't towering over her. He was meeting her at her level. "Are you okay? You look like you're having a worse day than I am. And I just spent 3 hours wrestling with a capacitor that's older than my grandfather." She couldn't find her voice. The simple act of being spoken to like a person was so alien it felt like a dream. He seemed to understand her silence. He looked her over, not with the clinical evaluation of the Grolak or the revulsion of the Vithar, but with a simple, human concern. He noted her shivering, the gauntness of her face. "Look," he said, sighing. He unclipped a small, insulated container from his belt. "I haven't taken my dinner break yet. It's not much, just synth noodle soup. But it's hot." He held it out. "Here, you take it." Lena stared at the container as if it were a holy relic. This was it. This was the moment the test was defined. An offering, freely given, with no expectation of reward. Her mind, the sharp, analytical mind of an heiress, raced through the variables. Was he trying to poison her? Was this a trick? But his eyes were clear, his posture open. There was no deceit there, only a weary sort of kindness. Slowly, her trembling hand reached out and took the container. The warmth seeped into her fingers, a shocking, profound sensation. "My name's Alex," he said, offering a small, tired smile. "I work in this sector, fixing the junk everyone in the spire forgets about." "Lena," she managed to rasp, her voice cracking. "Well, Lena, it's not safe to stay here. There's a small shelter by Gate 7th Gamma. They offer a heated room and a protein ration. It's not the spire, but it's better than a maintenance tunnel. He stood up, grabbing his fallen tool. I can walk you there if you like. My shift is almost over. This was more than the test required. The soup had been enough. The offer of guidance, of protection, was something else entirely. It was a recognition of her humanity, of her vulnerability. After days of being treated as refuse, this simple gesture of decency was overwhelming. She nodded, unable to speak. She opened the container. The steam that rose from the soup was the most fragrant, wonderful thing she had ever smelled. She took a sip, and the hot, salty broth was an explosion of life in her empty stomach. It was cheap, mass-produced food, the kind she wouldn't have fed to her pets, but in that moment it was the finest meal in the universe. Alex watched her, a sad look in his eyes. No one should have to be that hungry, he said quietly, more to himself than to her. He waited patiently while she finished, his presence a silent shield against the darkness of the tunnel. When she was done, she looked at the empty container, then back at him. "Thank you," she whispered, and the words felt inadequate, flimsy things to convey the tectonic shift that had just occurred within her. "Everyone needs a little help sometimes," he said with a shrug, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Come on, let's get you out of the cold." He led her out of the tunnel, his headlamp cutting a safe path through the gloom. He didn't walk ahead of her or behind her, but beside her. For the first time in days, she didn't feel like an obstruction or a piece of vermin. She felt like a person walking with another person. The human had passed the test. But as she walked beside him, a new, unexpected feeling began to sprout in the barren landscape of her soul. It wasn't the triumph of a successful trial. It was a curiosity. The test was over. She could leave, reveal herself, and claim her throne. Yet she found she didn't want to. She wanted to understand why. Why him? What in the harsh, unforgiving soil of this human's life had allowed such a rare flower as kindness to bloom? The test might be over, but Zilia's investigation had just begun. Lena didn't go to the shelter. When they reached the designated gate, she hesitated. I don't do well in crowds," she lied, the excuse tasting flimsy on her tongue. Alex stopped, concerned about furrowing his brow. "All right. Well, you can't stay in the tunnels." He thought for a moment, rubbing the back of his neck. It was a gesture of profound unease, and Zilia, a master at reading tells, knew he was wrestling with himself. "Look, this is probably a stupid idea, and you have every right to say no. But I have a small workshop just off this corridor. It's got a cot in the back. It's warm and the door locks. You could rest there for the night." No questions asked. His offer was a breach of a dozen station protocols. Harboring an unregistered individual was a finable offense, potentially costing him his job. He was risking his own meager livelihood for a complete stranger. It was recklessly, illogically kind. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked away, his gaze falling on a passing family of off-worlders, their child laughing. A shadow of pain crossed his face, so fleeting she almost missed it. "My little sister Sarah," he said, his voice low. "She got lost once at a festival. For 2 hours she was alone and scared. I'll never forget the look on her face when we found her, the look of someone who felt completely invisible to the world." He met her eyes again. No one should have to feel that way. "Come on." He led her to a small, unassuming door marked Utility Closet 71B. He pressed his thumb to a scanner, and it slid open to reveal not a closet, but a cramped but surprisingly organized workshop. Racks of tools lined one wall. The dissected carcasses of various droids and appliances lay on a central workbench. A faint smell of ozone and hot metal hung in the air. In the corner, just as he'd said, was a simple cot with a thin but clean blanket. "It's not the Imperial Palace," he joked, "but the power converter on the wall puts out a steady heat." Over the next few hours, Lena, or rather Zelia, conducted the most important interview of her life. She feigned sleep on the cot, but her senses, honed by years of training, were on high alert. She watched him work. His hands, though stained with grease, moved with a surprising grace and precision. He wasn't just a mechanic, he was a craftsman. He coaxed life back into machines the station had condemned, murmuring to them, cursing them, and finally, sighing in satisfaction when a diagnostic light blinked from red to green. He offered her more food, a nutrient bar he'd been saving. As they ate in companionable silence, she started to ask questions, piecing together the mosaic of his life. He was born on a terraforming colony that had failed, bouncing around the outer systems before ending up on Chiron Station. He wasn't educated in a formal academy, but had learned his trade by taking things apart. He sent most of his credits to his aging parents on a far-off agricultural moon. His sister Sarah had died years ago from a respiratory illness that could have been easily cured with the kind of advanced medicine available in the Spire. "It's the way of things," he said, his voice devoid of bitterness, only a deep, settled sadness. "Life's a lottery. Some are born in the penthouse, some in the boiler room. Doesn't mean the folks in the boiler room are worth any less. We just have to look out for each other down here, 'cause no one else is going to." His philosophy was a direct contradiction to everything Kaelin believed. It was the antithesis of the cold, meritocratic calculus that governed so much of the galaxy. It was noble. Zelia felt a strange, unsettling shift within herself. Her whole life had been a pursuit of greatness, of being smarter, faster, stronger. Alex's life was a quiet study in goodness. She had come to the vents to pass a test, to judge others. But now, she felt she was the one being judged, and she was coming up short. Meanwhile, in the Valerius Spire, Kaelin was growing impatient. He monitored the tracker embedded in Zelia's dermal symbiote. It showed her location, vitals, and nothing else. According to the trial's ancient rules, no audio or visual surveillance was permitted. 3 days, he sneered at his aide, a sycophantic Signian named Lycor. She's been in that cesspool for 3 days. She should have found some sniveling fool to give her credit by now and ended this farce. Perhaps she is enjoying the local culture, my lord, Lycor offered. She is stagnating, Kaelin snapped. Her locator hasn't moved from a single utility hub in Sector 7 for 12 standard hours. That's not the behavior of someone conducting a test. It's the behavior of someone holding up, hiding. He paced the room, his mind racing. The test is a pass-fail scenario. But what if she's found something else? A loophole? A connection? Kaelin's ambition was matched only by his paranoia. He couldn't stand not knowing. The ancient rules were a barrier, but modern technology offered solutions. Lycor, he commanded, accesses the station's deep sensor network. I want everything you can find in that specific utility closet. Internal schematics, power consumption logs, security sweeps. I can't watch her directly, but I can watch the world around her. If a rat has crawled into her hole, I want to know its name. Lyca's fingers flew across a holographic console. Accessing. Cross-referencing personnel files for authorized access to utility closet 71B. I have a name, my lord. A file appeared in the air between them, displaying a picture of a tired-looking human in a technician's uniform. Alex Ryder, Lycor read. Tier 7 maintenance technician, no criminal record, low security clearance, minimal assets, utterly insignificant. Kalen stared at the human's face. Insignificant. That was the problem. Why would his cousin, the heir to the galaxy's most powerful dynasty, spend 12 hours in a room with someone so utterly insignificant? Unless he wasn't. He is not insignificant if he is influencing her, Kalen hissed. He is a variable that must be eliminated. Zilia awoke to the smell of roasted synth coffee, a luxury in the lower vents. Alex was at his workbench, holding out a steaming mug. "Morning," he said cheerfully. "Figured you could use this. It's amazing what you can get a food dispenser to do if you know how to bypass its primary programming." She took the mug, her fingers wrapping around its warmth. For the first time in her life, she felt a sense of peace. This tiny, cluttered workshop had become a sanctuary. The idea of returning to the sterile perfection of the spire felt unappealing. "I should go," she said, though the words felt like a betrayal. "I can't impose on you any longer." "Nonsense," Alex countered, not looking up from the delicate circuitry of a datapad he was repairing. "Stay as long as you need." "Besides," he grinned, "you're a good listener. Most of my conversations are with stubborn servo motors." As he worked, he started explaining the station's infrastructure to her. He spoke of it not as a grand design, but as a living, breathing, and aging creature. "See this diagnostic?" he said, pointing to a flickering screen. "These are the energy regulators for the primary core. The numbers are supposed to be stable, but look." He traced a jagged, erratic line on the display. "Spikes, all over the place. I filed a dozen reports, but they get kicked back from some automated system upstairs. The bigwigs in the spire only replace things when they break. They don't believe in preventative maintenance." He tapped a schematic, zooming in on the station's core. "The whole thing is a Cygnian design. Brilliant, but overly complex. They built it with so many redundant safety features that they've started to contradict each other. It's like they've forgotten the beauty of a simple, reliable switch. Sooner or later, one of these spikes is going to cause a cascade failure." Zilia listened, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. He was talking about her people's technology. Her father had overseen the station's commission. The idea that it was flawed, that its foundation was crumbling from neglect, was unthinkable. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, violent shudder that ran through the entire station. Tools rattled on the walls. The lights flickered violently, then dimmed to a sickly orange emergency glow. An automated metallic voice echoed through the corridors. "Attention! Minor gravitic fluctuation detected. Please remain calm. Systems are nominal." Alex was already on his feet, his face pale. "Minor fluctuation, my ass," he muttered, his hands flying across his console. That was a core containment pulse, a big one. Before Zilia could ask what that meant, a section of the conduit above Alex's workbench exploded in a shower of brilliant blue sparks, a massive surge of energy, far greater than a simple short circuit, arced through the room. It struck the workbench, vaporizing the datapad he was holding and throwing him violently across the room. He crumpled to the floor, motionless. "Alex!" Zilia screamed, her voice reverting to its natural, melodic pitch in her panic. The vocal modulator sparked and died. She rushed to his side. His jumpsuit was smoking, and a severe electrical burn was visible on his arm and chest. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow. All protocol, all pretense of the test, vanished in a wave of pure, unadulterated fury. This was no accident. The energy surge was too precise, too powerful. It was targeted. It was Kalen. He must have found out about Alex. He had tried to murder an innocent man to disrupt her trial. Her mind, a weapon sharpened by years of relentless training, took over. She tore open the sleeve of Alex's jumpsuit. The burn was deep, the tissue damage catastrophic. The station's med services would never get here in time, and even if they did, their Tier 7 equipment was primitive. He would die. But she was not Lena, the helpless beggar. She was Zilia Valerius. She reached for the hem of her ragged tunic, tearing it open. Bonded to the skin of her abdomen, invisible under the dermal symbiote, was her last resort. The Imperator's seal. It was a flat, bio-integrated device containing a panic button and a single-use, top-of-the-line, Signian medical kit. She pressed her palm to the seal. It recognized her biometric signature, and with a faint hiss, a small panel on its surface opened, revealing a series of silver ampules and a dermal regenerator. This act officially ended the trial. She had used an external resource. She had revealed herself. She had, by the letter of the law, failed. She didn't care. She grabbed the regenerator, a device that used programmed nanites to rebuild tissue at a cellular level. It was technology worth more than this entire station sector. As she activated it, the dermal symbiote on her own hand shrieked and dissolved under the device's energy field, revealing her true skin beneath, pale and shimmering with its natural, pearlescent luster. Ignoring her own partial transformation, she pressed the regenerator to Alex's wound. The nanites went to work, the burned flesh knitting itself back together with an unnatural speed. As his breathing began to stabilize, a chime echoed from the Imperator's seal. It was a Priority 1 communication. A hologram flickered to life above it, projecting the stern, grim face of her father. "Zilia!" The Imperator's voice boomed, laced with an urgency she had never heard before. "The test is over, but the true crisis has just begun." Simultaneously, the station groaned around them, a deep, structural scream of tortured metal. Red emergency lights began to flash, and the automated voice returned, its calm facade gone, replaced by frantic alarm. "Warning, core containment failure imminent. Cascade event in progress. Evacuate. Evacuate all sectors." The tremor hadn't been a fluctuation. The power surge hadn't just been an assassination attempt. They were symptoms of a much greater disease. Alex had been right. The station was dying. The hologram of Imperator Valerius flickered, struggling to maintain coherence as power fluctuated throughout the station. "Zilia, listen to me. There is no time for explanation, only for action." "Kaelin did this!" Zilia snarled, her voice a dangerous mix of grief and rage as she worked the dermal regenerator over Alex's chest. "He tried to kill this man." "Kaelin's treachery is a secondary concern," the Imperator's voice cut through her anger. His power surge merely accelerated the inevitable. The station's primary energy core is in a feedback loop. It will reach critical mass and detonate in less than 1 standard hour. The official evacuation is a farce. The transport lanes are already compromised. It is a gesture to prevent panic, nothing more. Millions of souls will be lost. Alex stirred, groaning. His eyes fluttered open, blinking in confusion at the flashing red lights and the shimmering, otherworldly woman leaning over him. He saw the advanced medical device healing his skin, saw her iridescent hand, and his mind struggled to reconcile the image with the memory of the grimy beggar named Lena. What's happening?" he murmured. "Stay still," Zilia commanded, her tone softer than he'd ever heard it, yet filled with an authority that was absolute. "Father," she said, her attention snapping back to the hologram. "What is your command? Shall I rendezvous with an extraction team?" "There is no extraction," the Imperator stated grimly, "and I have no commands. Only a confession. The test of empathy was a lie. A necessary one." Zilia froze, the regenerator hovering over Alex's skin, A lie? Its purpose was real, but its premise was a fabrication, her father explained, his voice heavy with the burden of his deception. I have known about the core's instability for years. Our finest Cygnian engineers declared it a cascading system failure with a probability approaching certainty. Their simulations showed that all our advanced, networked solutions would be useless in a total feedback loop. The system would reject any high-level override. The flaw was fundamental. He continued, the original architects, my predecessors, built the station with a secret, a final, desperate failsafe, a complete manual override, isolated from the network, accessible only from a sub-level control room deep within the lower vents. It is not elegant. It is a system of physical breakers, coolant valves, and ignition sequencing that requires a technician's touch. It requires someone who understands the machine, not by its schematics, but by its groans, its rattles, its soul. The truth crashed down on Zilia with the force of a physical blow. The test was not to see if you had empathy, her father said, his voice softening with pride. I already knew you did. The test was to see if your empathy would lead you to the right person. We could not simply find a technician and brief them. The political fallout of admitting such a flaw would be catastrophic, and we couldn't know who to trust. I needed to find someone who not only had the skills, but whose character was unimpeachable. Someone who would act not for glory or wealth, but because it was the right thing to do. Your trial was not about finding kindness, my daughter. It was my gambit to find a savior. And she had. Alex Ryder, the simple, honest man who offered a stranger his soup. Kalen never understood, the Imperator finished, a hint of disdain in his voice. He saw the test as a weakness. He would have let the station burn to secure his power. He is a fool, blinded by ambition. You, Zilia, you have proven you are a true Valerius. You looked to the foundation, not the spire. The hologram fizzled and died as a section of the corridor outside collapsed, severing the connection. The full weight of the situation settled upon them. They were in a dying space station. Millions of lives were at stake, and the only hope was a low-level technician who had just been brought back from the brink of death by alien technology he couldn't possibly comprehend. Alex pushed himself into a sitting position, his head swimming. He looked at his arm. Where there should have been charred flesh, there was only smooth, new skin, pink and tender. He looked at Zilia, truly looked at her for the first time. The rags were the same, but the woman wearing them was a stranger. Her bearing was regal, her eyes burned with an impossible intensity, and her skin shimmered like a captured nebula. Lena, he whispered, his voice full of disbelief. My name is Zilia Valerius, she said, her voice clear and strong, stripped of all disguise. Heiress to the Cygnian ascendancy, and I believe the fate of this entire station rests on your shoulders. Another tremor, more violent than the last, shook the workshop. A support beam overhead groaned in protest. Alex stared at her, then around the collapsing room, then back to her. His mind, practical and logical, put the pieces together with stunning speed. The station failed, just as he predicted. This impossible woman with impossible technology. The story, as insane as it was, fit the facts. He didn't panic. He didn't gape in awe. He simply nodded, a grim determination settling on his face. Okay, he said. A manual override. Where is it? There was no time for shock or ceremony. The universe had been turned upside down, but the laws of physics remained stubbornly in place. The core was failing, and they had, by Zilia's estimate, less than 40 minutes. The control room is in sub-level 3. near the primary coolant intake, Zilia relayed, accessing the schematics her father had unlocked in the Imperator's seal. The path is compromised. Multiple structural collapses. Forget the schematics, Alex said, grabbing a heavy-duty plasma cutter from a rack. He tossed a diagnostic toolkit to Zilia. The official paths are death traps. We'll have to go through the service conduits. Follow me, and for God's sake, try to keep up, Your Highness. The title was laced with sarcasm, but also a grudging respect. He was no longer dealing with a beggar. He was working with a partner. They plunged into the bowels of the station. It was a hellscape. Steam vented from ruptured pipes, creating a blinding fog. Electrical cables snapped and whipped like angry serpents, showering the corridors with sparks. The groans of twisting metal were constant and deafening. Alex was in his element. This was his world, and he moved through its chaos with an innate understanding. He saw a sagging support and knew which way it would fall. He heard a change in the pitch of a hissing pipe and knew it was about to burst. He was not a warrior or a nobleman, but in this labyrinth of failing machinery, he was a king. "This way," he yelled over the din, cutting through a sealed maintenance hatch. "The main corridor's pressure has been compromised. We'll be vented into space if we go that way." Zilia followed, her lithe, aristocratic form moving with a grace that surprised him. Her fear was gone, replaced by a focused, diamond-hard resolve. She used the toolkit he'd given her with surprising competence, running quick structural analyses on the bulkheads he pointed to, calling out warnings. "The integrity of that junction is below 15%. We have to cross now." They were a strange but effective team, his practical, hands-on knowledge and her quick, analytical mind. The technician from the boiler room and the princess from the spire united in a desperate race against time. They reached a chasm where a corridor had once been. It was a sheer 50-foot drop to a lower deck, with the chasm floor littered with live power conduits. "No way across," Zilia said, her breath catching. "There's always a way," Alex countered. He pointed to a thick bundle of coolant pipes running along the ceiling. "They're unpressurized, but the magnetic clamps should hold our weight." He began to climb, moving with the confidence of someone who had spent his life navigating such urban jungles. Zilia, who had only ever traversed corridors on silent, floating grav discs, felt a tremor of fear. But then she looked at Alex, at his determined face, and took a deep breath. She was the heir to an empire. She would not be defeated by a length of pipe. She followed him, her movements less certain, but no less determined. They finally reached the armored door to the manual control room. A large, formidable red light pulsed above it. "Access denied. Imperial seal required." Zilia pressed the Imperator's seal against the panel. With a deep grinding of ancient gears, the door hissed open. The room was from another era. There were no holographic interfaces or touch-sensitive panels. It was a chamber of heavy, mechanical levers, thick copper switches, and large pressure-gauge dials with trembling needles. It was designed to be operated by hand, by muscle and instinct. It was a human-scale solution to a god-like problem. In the center of the room was a diagram of the core's ignition and containment system. It was a terrifyingly complex sequence. "My God!" Alex breathed, taking in the scale of it. It's a mechanical beast." He ran to the main console. "The feedback is in the magnetic containment field. We have to vent the plasma, kill the primary ignition, and then restart it with the reserve igniters in a precisely timed sequence. One lever out of order, and we either blow the core or snuff it out for good, killing all life support." A timer on the wall flashed. 5 minutes. "I can't do this alone," Alex said, his voice tight with stress. "I need you. On my mark, You have to throw the coolant release levers, all three, simultaneously. Not a second before, not a second after. He pointed to a set of massive, heavy levers across the room. It would take all her strength to move them. "Just tell me when," Zelia said, taking her position. "The pressure is building," Alex yelled, his hands flying across a panel, flipping safety covers off switches. "It's going to pulse again. 3, 2, 1. Now!" Zelia threw her entire body weight against the levers. Her muscles, unused to such exertion, screamed in protest. For a horrifying second, they wouldn't budge. She roared, channeling all her frustration, her rage at Kalen, her newfound respect for the man across the room, and slammed them down. The room shuddered as the coolant systems engaged. A deep, deafening roar filled the air. "It's working," Alex shouted in triumph. "Ignition cut, preparing for restart." He began to flip the sequence of heavy copper switches, his movements a blur of practiced expertise. The station's violent shaking began to subside, replaced by the steady, powerful thrum of a healthy power core. The red emergency lights flickered out, replaced by steady, white light. On the timer, 2 seconds remained. They had done it. Silence descended on the control room, broken only by their ragged breathing. They stared at each other across the room, covered in grease and sweat. Zelia's royal dress was in tatters, her shimmering skin smudged with grime. Alex's jumpsuit was half burned away. Slowly, a grin spread across Alex's face. Zelia found herself mirroring it. A laugh, genuine and unrestrained, bubbled up from her chest. She had never felt so alive. In the aftermath, a Cygnian cruiser, dispatched by her father, docked with the station. Kalen was taken into custody, his plot exposed not only by the Imperator, but by a dozen witnesses who saw the energy surge originate from a device under his control. Zelia stood on the bridge of the cruiser, dressed once more in the fine silks of her station. Alex stood beside her, looking profoundly awkward in a borrowed Cygnian formal tunic. "They're calling you a hero," Zelia said, looking out at the now stable Chiron station. "We were heroes," Alex corrected her gently. He still seemed to be processing the fact that the beggar he'd helped was one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. "So what happens now?" "You go back to being a princess, and I go back to fixing toasters." Zelia turned to him, her expression serious. "My father's gambit was to find a savior for the station, but I think he found something more. He found a new perspective for his empire." She paused. "I have a proposal for you, Alex Ryder. I am creating a new position in the Ascendancy, a council responsible for advising the Imperator on the practical, ground-level consequences of our policies, to be the voice for the people in the boiler room. I want you to be its first chairman." Alex was stunned into silence. "Me? I'm a mechanic." "You are the man who knew the station was dying when all our experts and algorithms said it was fine," she countered. "You are the man who offered his dinner to a beggar, expecting nothing in return. That is a kind of wisdom my empire desperately needs. Humanity's worth isn't in its starships or its weapons. It's in people like you." Alex looked from her earnest face to the glittering station and the vast star field beyond. His life, which had always been a small, cramped workshop, had suddenly expanded to the size of the cosmos. I'll have to think about it," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "But I have a feeling my toasters can wait." And so, a story that began with a test of kindness became the salvation of millions. Zelia Valerius ascended to her throne, not just as an heiress, but as a true leader, forever changed by the man who taught her that the strength of an empire is measured by how it treats its most vulnerable. Alex Ryder, the humble technician, became a voice for the voiceless, his simple, human decency echoing through the corridors of power. Their story reminds us that true worth is not found in wealth or status, but in the simple, profound act of reaching out a hand to someone in the dark. It proves that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't a starship's engine, but the beating of a kind human heart. What did you think of Zilia's journey? Would you have passed the test? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this tale of cosmic drama and human spirit, please hit that like button, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more stories from across the galaxy. Thank you for listening.